This is the best new speed boot of 2024, and a large portion of that is because it's the only one of the big three that seems to be taking the moniker of speed boot seriously. Now, that doesn't mean that it's a perfect speed boot, and it does have one particularly large flaw, for me at least, that almost put me off the boot entirely. So to quickly talk about this versus the previous generation, this is better in every single way. Done. There is, of course, the carbon variation of this, and there is a women's fit and an AG plate as well. I'm going to cover all of those in reviews, so get subscribed to pick up that and any comparisons that are coming along as well. And like the video while you're at it. Let's start with the upper, which is a textile mesh base with kind of a top coating on it. This is still the grip control, but it's very, very different. It's not the same as what we've had before. And this upper is delightful. It is really soft, and it softens up really nicely the more that you use it. Now, it's not quite Vapor 16 soft, but it's right up there, and I have absolutely no complaints. It's also pretty thin, and when you combine the mesh upper with that kind of grippy, rubbery almost top coating and the softness of it, it kind of starts to feel, when you're striking a ball, a bit like an old style synthetic upper. And I really like that. You get a really nice kind of ping when you do hit the ball. It's not crazy barefoot, but it is definitely one-to-one, and you can definitely feel the ball close to your foot. And these are all things that we're absolutely looking for in a speed boot, and thus far, the Ultra Ultimate knocks it out of the park. Now, depending on your preference, you might find that this kind of rubbery top coating that has been put on the boot isn't for you. It might be too much. I really like it, but I think that one definitely comes down to personal preference. Worth at least getting them in hand to give it a go. We're going to keep talking about the upper, but we're going to move on to the responsiveness. I like to talk about responsiveness in the upper in the way that when you make hard cuts, when you really push against the edge of the boot, do you spill over, or does the boot stay with you? And this boot in particular has a really innovative use of Puma's power tape technology. And I don't know if you can see it. I'm wondering, it might be slightly easier to see on the purple one, maybe not. There's basically a cage that runs here, particularly through this midfoot area, and it provides a lot of stability to that midfoot of the boot, and it does mean that when you take big cuts, the boot feels really stable in the upper, like it's not going to go anywhere. And while we're still talking about responsiveness, of course, we want to talk about the outsole, and this is a nice, stiff, stable heel and midfoot, and it keeps the whole boot feeling really responsive. Again, it's still very much a speed boot. Every element I'm talking about makes this a speed boot, and I absolutely love it. Again, responsiveness, outsole, let's talk about the old snapback here, and it's very nice. It's actually quite excellent. It's probably, yeah, never mind probably, it's definitely the best when it comes to those big three. When it comes to the new F50, the Mercurial, and this definitely has the best spring back and the most responsive outsole. Hell, it has the most responsive upper as well. We'll move on to the traction, have a look at the stud pattern, stud shape here. And again, this is super aggressive. This is one of the most aggressive stud patterns and stud shapes that you're going to get. It's right up there with what you're going to get from the Mercurial line. Way more aggressive than the F50. And again, I really, really like it. The studs are pretty long. And overall, when you combine this particular stud length, stud pattern, stud shape with that stability and the spring back, you have a very aggressive feeling boot. And then you combine that with the thin upper, and you're building yourself a really aggressive, proper speed boot. And I love all of that about the Puma Ultra Ultimate. It's great, really, really good. Similarly to that kind of grippy feeling on the upper, something else that's going to be personal preference is going to be the tilt. So the boot itself, I'm hoping there's a camera that's going to catch this, the boot itself tilts up just on the end here to give you that kind of pushed onto your toes runner's spike kind of feel. And this is great for feeling like you are able to push off very quickly for straight line speed. Personally, I generally prefer a flatter sole plate, and I think with this particular stud style, it would have worked really, really nicely, but it's not a criticism. This is very much a case of this boot does this thing, and whether you like it or not is up to you. I will also mention that surprisingly, I've not actually had any stud pressure, and I've been a crazy person and used these on AG pitches, which I absolutely do not recommend, by the way. This is an FG boot with a very aggressive stud shape and pattern, and you should absolutely not use this on an AG pitch. Let's talk about lockdown. Now, I was expecting to get a really, really nice amount of lockdown out of this boot because the lacing system is very deep and it also runs quite wide. And I was set up to be impressed. My expectations were high. It's one of the things that I really anticipated about this boot, and it's just not quite there. A lot of the lockdown that you're going to get, a lot of the feeling comes from the shape of the boot. It's almost like you get with a laceless boot, whereby the predetermined shape of the boot very much determines how your foot fits and how much lockdown you're going to get. There just seems to be very little adjustability within the lacing system. It just doesn't seem to have that much of an impact outside of maybe holding everything together a little bit more. Now, don't get me wrong, it's still perfectly acceptable. I'm absolutely not complaining about it, but considering how good everything else is in terms of that speed boot vibe, that was a tiny bit of a letdown for me. You'll also notice that I've got mine in with a runner's loop here, and that is linked to my problem, or my main problem with the boot. And I do recommend the runner's loop just to give you that little bit of extra lockdown and push your heel into the back of the boot. Speaking of the heel, we should probably get straight into that, and it is my least favorite thing about this boot. Absolutely no question. I don't particularly like the shape, but that very much could just be how my heel fits this particular boot, so that's okay. But in terms of design, it has this external heel counter, no problems with that, but the heel itself is still quite stiff up to this point here, and this is where I get the pressure point. This is where it's particularly uncomfortable. The rest of it is nice and soft, and I find here to be very hard and has a serious pressure point for me, to the point where this almost was a breaking point. I was almost like, I can't wear these. It's not doing it for me. So do be aware of that. Some of it's definitely going to come down to personal preference. And you've also got to be aware that there is no padding to save you. There is very, very minimal padding. You've got two little pouches here using the Ortholite foam, and I just don't think there's enough padding to hold your heel in place well enough, and the actual feeling of the heel just isn't comfortable enough and gives me that really painful bit just here on the boot. I just think maybe if you're gonna, that needs to be softer if that's the case, and increase the size of the heel counter up the sides. I really do not like the heel in the boot. I have kind of gotten over it and used them. The more I broke them in, the softer it got. But it is easily my least favorite thing about this boot, and Puma boots in general at the moment. The heels just aren't working for me. Now that I've said the heel isn't particularly comfortable, let's talk about the comfort. Quick look at the insole, which is, yep, it's an insole, and it's not the most comfortable boot. It's not uncomfortable by any means, apart from my experience with the heel, but this is a much more raw feeling boot. It's got that thin upper, it's got the aggressive outsole. If you're looking for something that's plush and comfortable and walking on clouds, this isn't it. So if you're looking for something in that area, don't buy this. If you're looking for a proper speed boot, like I said at the beginning, then this is well worth your time. With comfort always comes fit, so let's talk about it. I went down half a size in this boot, so I would normally be a US 8 in Puma and Nike boots. In this instance, I've gone down to a US 7.5, UK 6.5 for the Puma Ultra Ultimate, and I'm glad that I did. It just leaves me too much room at the front of the boot if I go with that normal size, and overall there is enough width in the boot to absolutely get away with going down that half size. However, be aware that if you do go down a half size, you are really pushing the limits of what you'll get away with. You have to want your boots to fit very close and very tight to go down that half size. If you stay with your normal size, you're likely going to have a little bit of room at the end of the boot. You might be okay with that. Personally, I like going down that half size. I like that tighter fit. I like that closer fit. I just think it makes the whole boot feel a lot more, it's almost like dynamic. It makes me feel better on the ball. It makes that tilt just feel that little bit better. And I think overall it was the right thing to do, but do what's right for you. In terms of width, there is actually a surprising amount of width through the Ultra Ultimate. I found more so than you'll get from the Ultra Carbon. So if you happen to have a wider foot, I don't really see you having too many issues here. Now, the opening to get your foot in isn't massive, so be aware of that. And like I say, I'm not saying this is great for the widest feet, but if you just have a generally wider foot, this could be a good option for you. One of the better options for a speed boot, along with the Mercurial, which is also pretty good for a wider foot. If you have a regular foot, narrow foot, I think both of these will be fine in this boot. Something that possibly ties into that slightly strange fit and also the lockdown not being amazing is the volume. There is a reasonable amount of volume through this boot. It's not a particularly low volume boot, even more so in the Carbon. There is even more volume through that boot. So if you do have a quite voluminous foot, this might be worth looking into, but it does take away a little bit from those speed boot feels, those speed boot vibes that we go looking for. It's not a problem, just something to be aware of, and maybe something that strips away a little bit of that really close one-to-one shrunk wrapped kind of feeling. You're not going to get that. This is still more user-friendly than any of those boots. It's not a Vapor 8. Like, a lot of you have been asking me about durability recently, and durability is a hard one to comment on because it's so unbelievably variable, but I will give you my experience. So I have actually had 3 different pairs of the Ultra Ultimate used across 3 months, and I've not had any particular issues with the durability of the boot. However, I do have one particular concern. It's not come into anything crazy yet, but I do feel like the sole plate is softening up. Now, that happens with all boots, but I feel like it's softening up quite quickly, and if that sole plate softens up too much too fast, you're obviously going to take away some of that, like the spring back, the element, that speed boot feel that you really, really want. So something to keep an eye on, and if I have any further updates, I will let you know. So let's do a quick comparison of the 3 speed boots from the big 3 brands. And my bottom line is, if you want a speed boot to do speed boot things, then this is absolutely your option. But these are 2 very good boots, great boots actually. And if you want to see the review of the Mercurial, then click this link right here.